Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Lean In Olympia. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Corey Passons, and I'm one of the co-hosts of this podcast. I'm with Interfaith Works. Interfaith Works is a social justice nonprofit serving Thurston County. We are a coalition of interfaith spiritual communities and affiliated organizations. We're also one of the region's largest social service providers to people experiencing homelessness in our region. And this podcast is a bi-weekly show coming to you from Olympia, Washington. It features conversations at the crossroads of humanity, justice, and belief. If you want to check out past episodes or stay up to date with the work that Interfaith Works is doing, please go to our website at interfaith-works.org, or you can check out the Interfaith Works Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and Spotify. We'll be posting this episode on YouTube and Spotify, so look for that and stay tuned to past episodes. And I want to extend a very warm welcome to our guest today, Dr. Thelma Jackson. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Corey, for having me.
It's so good to be with you today. And I'm going to just take about 20 minutes now and read your bio.
Please don't. Please don't.
Just a few things. I want to help people understand the breadth and length of your commitment to social service and just the where you've traveled and pioneered in your career. Dr. Jackson is founder of the Northwest Institute for Leadership and Change, whose purpose is to promote community empowerment, conduct research, and provide data and analysis on leadership and systematic change issues. She is the owner of Foresight Consultants, bringing over 35 years of consulting experience in education change initiatives, restructuring and reform, equity and diversity, policymaking, cultural competency, and more. And I think we'll be covering a lot of those topics today. You've served on the task forces and advisory councils for 5 governors of the state of Washington. You've served as the president of the Washington State School Directors Association, and for 20 years was a member and 5-time president of the North Thurston School Board, among many other accolades and achievements and just markers of public service. So first of all, I have one more little piece of your bio, but thank you for your service, your long service to the community, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you.
You received your Bachelor of Science and degree in biochemistry from Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1968, and a doctorate degree in educational leadership and change from Fielding Graduate University in Santa Barbara, California in 2002. She and her husband moved to the area 50 years ago, 50 years. You've been married 50 years. Congratulations.
57 years.
57
We've been married.
years?
And
Oh,
we
goodness.
moved here about 53 years ago.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
yeah. And so 3 children and 4 are there more grandchildren now?
No.
Okay,
No.
four grandchildren, 4 granddaughters, it looks
Yes.
like. Oh, okay.
Yes.
And they've resided in the state of Washington for 48 years and in the Olympia area for 45 years. And we will probably touch on some of the meaning of the dates for when you arrived, because that's connected to the book. And this book here, we will be talking about soon. Blacks in Thurston County, Washington, 1950 to 1975, a community album. And we'll spend time with this book today, and we'll talk about where to get it and hear more about it from you. So thank you for being here. And I was wondering if we could just begin at the beginning. If you could help us know where you're from, where you grew up, and who helped to form you and build you.
I grew up in Pritchard, Alabama, a small suburb of Mobile, the deep south on the Gulf Coast. There I was until I ventured into Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to college. And from there here in 1968, the state of Washington. I grew up in essentially an all-black setting, black neighborhood, black community, black environment, black education, the entire thing of the whole black experience, the full black experience in the midst of Jim Crow laws, extreme discrimination, racism, prejudice, bigotry. That was the environment in which I grew up. For the most part.
Yeah. Was your family, had they lived there long before you were born there? Were they new to the area when you were growing up?
Yes, for quite a while. Yes, for quite a while. Those were their roots as well.
So when you're talking about growing up in Jim Crow and a time of discrimination in an all-black community, was that community formed and cohesive because of the experience that was essentially surrounding them.
Well, absolutely. That's the only way communities like mine survived, was togetherness, being cohesive, uh, all black, everything. You know, with segregation, there was no mingling of the races, none. So you had separate and unequal everything, education, you know, public accommodations, the whole thing. Yes.
At that time, who were some of the people that you would consider the most influential for you as you were coming up and living in that environment?
Well, thinking in terms of the early 50s, moving into the 60s, it was quite a civil rights era as far as activity by the NAACP, the Congress on Racial Equality, that kind of preceded Dr. Martin Luther King and the nonviolent movement. But thinking in terms of all the way back to 54 with the Montgomery bus boycotts and Rosa Parks, and of course I was just a kid and just didn't have any reference to those kinds of things. But it was during that era, kind of the pre-civil rights era movement. And so as I aged, became a teenager, and then off to college, things really began to heat up. You know, I graduated high school in 1963, so that was the year before 1964 and the Civil Rights Act, 1965 and the Voting Rights Act. So a lot of activity that took place for years before those things were actually enacted. But, you know, in my happy childhood background, I was not conscious of all that was going on. Not really.
But you're now describing a space in a time in your life where you're getting close towards the end of high school, and there's these seminal
Yes.
movements happening.
Yes.
Were you feeling that at the time?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Getting towards high school graduation and thinking and worrying about where did you go from here, where higher education was essentially a pipe dream for black youngsters growing up in the South. And it had nothing to do with your capability or your academic prowess. It was all about race and skin color. And so the older you got, the more prevalent in your thinking process that became. And it was a time of even there in Mobile, you know, lynchings, and I can remember being on the sidewalk. I wasn't in the rural Mobile. I was in, you know, city, so to speak. And to just see Ku Klux Klan going down the street in their white hoods and robes, and, you know, so you were aware of your surroundings and your presence. And we had our own little library, our own little park, you know, separate but certainly not equal. We walked to school as the busloads of white kids passed us by. Never had a school bus to ride, you know. So you were very conscious of the difference, the indifference, the inequity, you know. But those kinds of things and those kinds of experiences, I think, helped form the adult I became. The kind of change you wanted to see, and those outstanding teachers and administrators, you know, our black staff, they did a fantastic job of preparing us for life thereafter. Failure was not an option.
Wow.
For anybody, whether you were the 4.0 valedictorian like I was, or you were number 238 in the class. It didn't matter. Failure was not an option. And so with that as a backdrop, you were pushed, you were challenged, you were, you know. And so had it not been for that kind of upbringing, I doubt seriously if I would be the conscious adult that I am today.
What a what an honor to look back at all the people that have formed our lives, and looking into your life, and just these
Yes.
people that you name, and the teachers and the people who just created this network that supported and helped to build you in
And
this
the
really
community.
the
And the
community.
village.
Hmm.
That, it truly was a village, a village concept, a village idea. And young folk today don't have, that kind of love and supportive environment. And we were all poor. I was in college before I realized I was poor. By that I mean you start studying about, if you're a percentage of the such ever income level, then you qualify for poverty programs. Oh my God, we've been poor all this time. But we lived in a home, working parents, sidewalks, streets, bicycles, roller skates. But everybody was in the same boat. So,
You're there together.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But looking back on it, those were tremendous years of my life. They really were.
I'm not knowing you. I'm not surprised to hear that there's this network of people that were supporting you and
Absolutely.
building you up, and so here you are. You're looking at these dynamics emerging, exploding even in America. You're getting ready to leave your hometown to go to school. How are you feeling? What are your hopes as you're entering into college? Do you have models that tell you what you could accomplish, or are you kind of making your own way?
Making my own way because no one in my family had ever gone to college before. So I didn't have any college graduate role models in the family. So I had to make my own way. I had always had thoughts and dreams as a little girl growing up to be a scientist one day. And so a little black girl in the deep South with an aspiration to be a scientist one day, just odds against you. But I managed to, as you indicated in the introduction, and thank you for that, a bachelor degree in biochemistry.
Yeah.
And recruited from Southern University by Battelle Northwest here in the Pacific Northwest in the Tri-Cities. And that's what brought me to the Northwest, to the state of Washington. And this is a long story and a big bridge and a long bridge that really went from science over to the education arena where most of my professional life has been spent.
Yeah.
That's another day's discussion.
It's another day's discussion, but what we're seeing is that you had, even as a student, you had a keen interest in your own education.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You were invested in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the whole educational environment just emphasized to you the importance of education as something no one could ever take from you. And it wasn't so much of being taught everything as it was being taught how to find what you don't know. And instilling in you the sense of self-worth, the self-esteem, reminding you of your gifts, your talents, your brilliance, and you can do anything you want to do kind of thing. So that was a much more important preparation for life than any book learning would have been. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the value there.
Yeah.
And I've gone back a number of times for many years with my class for class reunion.
Oh.
And
We're talking high school now?
high school
Oh, okay,
reunion, class
yeah.
of 63.
Yeah.
And sit around and we reminisce and reflect on now as we look back, what a fabulous job our teachers did for us. And
Yeah.
class turned out some tremendous people.
Beautiful.
We're all of the retirement age now. So retired from this, retired from that. That principal, this nurse, this teacher, this business owner, that, it was just, none of us thought that those kinds of things were in our future. But those teachers were so intent on making sure that we were prepared for opportunity. We were prepared for, stuff we sit around and laugh and talk about. And oh, Miss So-and-so, every year, here she would come with the oratorical contest. That you need to know how to speak. And,
Wow.
blah, blah, blah.
Uh-huh.
And oh, my goodness, has that come in handy? Or, that kind of thing. No, do that again. I want to hear that diction. We want to hear that punctuate, straighten up that,
You're
And
channeling
we
her right
just
now.
laugh. We would just laugh and say, who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
That I was going to be a principal one day in front of an auditorium of staff, or, speaking before hundreds of people. Who would have thought? Said, but they knew. They knew, and they prepared us as best they could, given the limited resources they had. So we bring our teachers and those for years, those that were still living, and when they became incapacitated or not driving, we sent a white limo to go pick them up and bring them to the banquet for the class reunion and tell them just how much we appreciated, what they did for us. Because the older we got, the more we realized just what that was. And so that was my upbringing.
Yeah.
That was the nurturing environment that I was a part of.
Yeah, they knew what they were trying to teach.
Yes.
Yeah, they knew what they
Yes.
wanted to give to you.
They knew the world we were headed into. We didn't. We had been so insulated and so nurtured, and we didn't know.
But you were going to need strength and confidence moving
That's
out of
right.
that space into
Exactly.
this world. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing about them with us. And do you have one more question on that school in your class? Do you have another reunion coming up, or what? Did you just have one in this 23?
No. They're still
Like a
having
50?
them. This was the first one I did not attend.
Okay. That was a big
after-
one, though.
Huh?
This from 63 to this year. That's
Yeah,
a
it was
big
would
one.
have been the class of 60, the 63rd anniversary
Wow.
of the class of 63.
Okay.
And they went forward with it, but I decided that travel had just become so much more prohibitive from one tip of the country to the next, and no direct flights into Mobile, so always had to go and change planes And now in this day and age, you travel, your flights are canceled, or you're stuck in
Yeah.
airports
Oh, yeah.
looking for a whole. I said, guys, I can't
I'm
do
going
it
to sit this
anymore.
one out.
I can't do it anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, more than likely I've attended my last class reunion. But Thelma, you have to. So I sent a letter that they read at the banquet. So I was the class valedictorian, the class historian, and I was president of the student body. So a lot of responsibilities there.
Yeah.
And
Well, you're-
roles that I played when I'd go back.
And just the way you're talking about your connection to them and your fidelity to them, it speaks about your ongoing commitment to community, to in the civic community, faith community. I'm just really feeling that as a thread throughout your life. And you also mentioned history. I'm going to use that as a segue to move towards your book. This is the book that you've published most recently, Blacks in Thurston County, Washington. You've called it a community album. So we've been
Yes.
talking about community in that sense of an album, like a family is really
Yes.
how, I feel like you're addressing this. And the years here that this book profiles are 1950 to 1970. Of course, you arrived to this area
50
within
to
this.
75.
Yeah,
It's a
within this.
25-year span of time.
Yeah, and the book talks about the decision to work within this time frame, and it says that it profiles Black individuals who settled in Thurston County between 1950 and 1975, and tells the stories of their migration into the area long after the settlement of Tumwater by Black pioneer George Bush, who in 1843. And this person, George Bush, is someone who's often referenced in history books, but not many other Black people or people who came here and have made immense impacts and contributions to the area. So this was the gap in the history of this place that you wanted to fulfill, and took 3 years in the making to create this book. And you placed the book in 3 different eras. I'm going to just briefly describe those, and I'll turn it back to you. In the 1950s, there's migration to the Thurston County area with the integration of in the military and affirmative action in state agencies. is one era of migration. Another would be 1960 to 1975. There are additional waves of Black families and professionals in the area to help support the Evergreen State College as faculty and staff. And this is the era in which you arrive in the region. And then finally, you offer 1975 as a conclusion to this window, and you name the establishment of New Life Baptist Church. And this is, I'm fascinated to come back to that as I've been growing more just in my relationship with the pastor there and with the community there. I just want to hear about how you see that as a bookmark, if you will, or a place to have a closure on why that was important to you. So, yeah, I guess let's begin with the book itself, and just if you could tell us more about what it was like for you to create it.
Well, when we first came to the state of Washington in 1968, we were in eastern Washington, in the Tri-Cities, where I was recruited to work for Battelle Northwest in Richland on the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. And after about 3 years, we moved west of the mountain when my husband went to work for state government. So that's what brought us to the Thurston County area. And he came in 70, and I came in 71, still working there on the Hanford project. So 71, we're talking about 52 years ago that we lived in Lacey within about a 3-mile radius. Lived in several locations, but within about 3 miles. And so that was my transition from science. And I was an at-home mother there. And like typical mothers, your first kids start kindergarten, and you kind of start kindergarten with them. The room mother and this kind of thing. So that got me started in that whole education arena, the PTA president, and then learning how public education works from the point of view of policymaking and who, you know. And then, you know, the short number of Black people that we found here in the Olympia, Thurston County area, because we found the Black community in the Tri-Cities. It turned out to be over in East Pasco, kind of the ghetto section of that section where Blacks had come in years earlier and actually helped build the Hanford Project and the railroads and that kind of thing. And, you know, the whole Manhattan Project and the development of the atomic bomb and all that stuff. But then they were sequestered in a certain section of the city to live. So you literally went under the viaduct and over the railroad track, and voila, that was the Black community.
Oh, wow.
Black churches, schools predominantly Black. So when we came over here, we didn't find such a cluster. We found just a handful of other Blacks. And so my husband busy in state government, and I'm busy with the kids and becoming more and more invested in the community, the YWCA, and some other kinds of things. And began to get interested in the history of the place. Well, certainly there had to be, you know, Blacks in Pierce County, Tacoma, Blacks in King County, Seattle. Why hardly no Blacks here in Thurston County? So my historical research interests began to develop. And so you learn about George Bush, you learn about, you know, the settlement and that kind of thing. And so that kind of come to an abrupt halt in the early 1900s. So here we are in 1971. I said, well, what's going on here? You know, and the more I began to investigate and talk to people, we had learned a few people around, some of those earlier folk who had been here, Virgil Clarkson, Mary Wilson, and some other pioneers. And so when I began to think about the lack of written history about Black folk in Thurston County, and at that point I said, well, I guess if it's to be written, I must be the one to write it. And so it really was about a 10-year project other than just 3, because
Yeah.
off and on and off and on, and trying to begin to make lists of people you could identify who had been here, so they can't cover this whole thing.
Yeah.
So what bite of this elephant am I going to take?
Uh-huh.
So I decided to start with those still living and go with oral interviews. Let me at least capture this before they pass on, and to cover from 1900 to 1950 is another whole challenge. And to bring it as far as 1975, which at this point is almost another 50 years ago.
Right.
It'll soon be 2025.
Uh-huh.
But just to try and help it be manageable.
Yeah.
And so that's why I settled on 1950 to 1975, that 25-year period there, with the focus as far as the interviewing process on the most elderly and those that were fragile, and trying to get to them to interview before,
Yeah.
memory was gone or
Yeah.
incapacitated and couldn't talk, or whatever the case might be. And so we just kept whittling at it until, we had identified about 75 people, of which about 48 of them, I think, we interviewed, and to some degree. And very interesting stories.
Very interesting
We
stories,
wanted to
yeah.
know things like, what brought you here? Where did you come from? What did you do once you got here?
Yeah.
What have your experiences been like? What about your families, your spouses, your children?
Yeah.
And so we developed a protocol of questions so that everyone was being asked similar kinds of things, and went through some training on how to ask follow-up questions and how to request photographs if they had any that they would be willing to share. And so it slowly began to fall into place.
Yeah.
Slowly began to fall into place. And so the last things we did was gave it a title, and then came up with a book cover. And so the cover of the book
Yeah.
is actually the black artist Jacob Lawrence, one of his prints from his migration series. And it looked like black folk with suitcases coming somewhere, going somewhere. So it was part of a migration movement.
Well, can I offer a quick insight
Sure.
for people about you mentioned examples from the book, and the book it's built around biographies from people. I wanted to just give a brief snapshot of one of the biographies as an example, from Mary Jackson, who you referenced earlier, and with Virgil Clarkson. This is a person in your book, and this is an example of a story in the book. She arrived in Fort Lewis in 1954 with her husband Jimmy, but they had to return back to Philadelphia where they came. And she describes traveling by car across the country and living into that experience that she references, which has been kind of broadcasted in the recent movie, The Green Book, which describes about how migration for black people
Right.
would happen, and the care with which they would need to migrate through
Right.
spaces that were not safe.
That's right.
And
Where to go, where not to go.
where not to go.
Where to make sure you didn't break down,
Yeah, and she returns to the area in 1957. They try to buy a home here, and a petition is started by white neighbors to try to block them from buying that home in the
Yes.
area. They encounter the petition. They stop the petition. They buy a home, but when they moved into that home, there was a cross burning in their front
Yes.
yard.
Absolutely.
I had to. I'm very honest with you. I had to stop in my tracks for a moment, Dr. Jackson, and just realize that that was here in
Here.
this area. And
That's right.
when I've
Not
learned
too
about these
long ago.
things, I've learned about them as being somewhere else, but it was here. There were eggs thrown at their home. Her husband taught her how to handle a firearm.
For protection
For
reasons.
protection. Their home, which they bought, was intentionally sabotaged by subcontractors to eventually have a slow leak in the pipes, which devastated their basement. When their child entered high school, they were the only black child there. But despite all of this, and this is what just really was an incredible moment in her story, she talks about her decision. Despite all of these things that we just mentioned, she decided to make this place her home. And she offers a quote, and I just want to give you this quote for people to inspire you towards the power of these biographies. She says, this is the final quote in her biography: "As you go through life, approach things with dignity. I always try to approach everything with dignity and hold my dignity. No matter how angry I get, another person who will yell and scream, it gets them nothing. I say approach things by studying them, what problems you're going to have, what it takes to overcome these problems, and always try to do it. Beautiful. Amazing.
And she's describing the coping skills that she had to develop for herself in order to just survive. Otherwise, and we saw that kind of thinking reoccur in a number of the other interviews of how have you made it around here? How did you overcome those obstacles and those very negative experiences you were subjected to? And we not only held interviews of people, but we, from a research point of view, we took the time to try to analyze some of that data. What are we learning from these stories? What seem to be some of the recurring themes that appear, no matter who we talk to, whether they came in the 50s, the 60s, the early 70s, what appeared to be the common themes? And it was housing discrimination.
Housing discrimination.
And the inability to find anywhere to live, buy, rent, lease, it didn't matter. And we came across the racially restrictive covenants that were on pieces of property. And I, for one, had an aha moment to say, aha. Now I understand why most of us live in Lacey in the northeast section of the county, because we were not allowed to live in Olympia and Tumwater. And my husband and I had experienced that as well. You just weren't shown properties, and so that explains. And then around here, the story was, well, most of them are in the military and they want to be near the bases. That's why no.
That's what they said.
No, that's not so. Way too many that weren't in the military, such as us, that realtors just didn't show you certain properties. And then I came to understand that Tumwater and Olympia were very old cities from the 1800s. City of Lacey was a relatively young municipality, incorporated in only 1967. So they weren't burdened down with these racially restrictive covenants. And then you had a very different kind of land developer. The gentleman who built Tangawall, East Tangawall, Thompson Place, and he made his properties available to black people. And black people was the most prevalent minority group at the time. And therein, that was my aha moment. Here is the explanation. Here is the reason why. The North Thurston School District is now a majority minority school district. This is where most of the students of color attend school in this county. This is why we live where we live. We've been herded, and we were herded over time into a particular area of the county, and I never knew that before, but through these interviews,
that was
we
one
figured
of the
that
prevalent
out.
data points.
One of the themes that emerged, no matter who we talk to.
Yeah, I certainly saw that in the select biographies I've read in the book.
And then we would want to know, well, how did the students fare? And like Mary's son, Chip, he was the only black kid in Olympia High School for years. North Thurston School District didn't exist then. You went to Olympia schools. The only kid in the school, in your class, and we'd interview some of those kids. They aren't directly quoted in the book, but the name calling and the bullying and the harassment that they were just subjected to day in, day out, month in, month out. And so they're heroes. I mean, they put up with a lot, And some of them would say, we didn't go home and report certain things to our parents. We didn't want to get our parents in trouble because we knew they would go to school and, in their advocacy for us, get themselves in trouble. And, so anytime you've already got cross burnings and eggs thrown at your house and that kind of thing, kids became protective of their parents and just sucked it up and didn't make parents aware of some of the atrocious kinds of day-to-day treatment, they were subjected to. So
Can I
it was
ask
a
about-
lot of interesting anecdotal kinds of things that emerged out of those oral interviews.
For students to, experience discrimination, open discrimination in their schools is something you're talking about. But also, I've talked to Black parents today whose children go through school, and the first time that they saw a teacher that looked like them might have been high school. And
If then.
if then, yeah.
If-
And so I want to just before I just assume it, I want to ask you: are these students also in all white leadership too for teachers as they're coming through these schools?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
My two older children, they never had a Black teacher or a teacher of any other color. So from a home point of view, always had to keep them, going back to my own upbringing. Well, here's what you need to know. Here's how you need to conduct yourself. Here's how you must learn how to interact. You must rise above it all. My son came along some years later, and he had one Black teacher in his experience. And so
in North Thurston.
in North Thurston School
Okay,
District, yeah. So from the point of view of ethnic studies or ever learning anything about their history as a people, nothing in the curriculum. So they got that at home. They got that at home.
But those teachers that, like you talked about, that are there to, they're there to help you go into this world,
Absolutely.
and they have an intention to
That's
love
right.
you and to build you, and like that's not something that was offered
No.
or available to these
No.
children in these times.
No.
I do want to ask about now, but we're focusing on this kind of time period too. Yeah.
So coming up in my schools with all Black teachers, all Black administrators, we were taught Black history. We were taught Black history. It was just interwoven into everything. And so now, until recently, it was never even acknowledged by the schools. It maybe got a day or a week or whatever. And right now, there's a lot of controversy about whether or not ethnic studies should be a part of the curriculum. And it's a no-brainer. Ethnic studies need to be there for all students. Any student graduating K-12, if they haven't had ethnic studies, they've been miseducated. How are you going to cope with a multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic world citizenship, and you never learned about anybody else? And so it's not just for students of color, but it's more for white kids, so that they don't turn out to be the ignorant adults a lot of their parents are. And so what a lot of the students that were second tier in these interviews, what they experienced, very little has changed.
Yeah.
Very little has changed.
one of my
Black studies
questions.
not included.
Yeah.
Ethnic studies not included. Still very few teachers of color that look like the student population. And like I said, North Thurston now is a majority minority school district. Fewer white students than there are kids of color. But the staff, the administration, the leadership, a few sprinkled in, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I had is that, when you're writing history, history is also about looking ahead too, and
Yes.
it's about the present day as well. It's not just isolated events in the past. And as I was thinking about this interview and spending time with you today, and thinking about these really amazing stories that are here, I was going to ask you. You talked about data points, and that's like some of the most pressing themes. But I was also wondering if you had another subject along the lines of wisdom. Like, what are some of the top wisdoms that you felt come out of this book, and then where could those be felt or expressed for us today?
It became very, very obvious that there was an awful lot of contribution, wisdom, knowledge contained within the earlier Black people who came to this region. They blazed the trail for those who are there now, who's come later, and especially since 1975. So if you've got the financial resources, you can more than likely live anywhere in Thurston County you want to, if you can afford a house, you know. That wasn't the case, you know, back then. But the people who came, the Mary Wilsons of the world, they worked to change things. The Fair Housing Ordinance that they worked to get instilled and adopted by the city councils of the various cities. They inserted themselves in the community. They were a part of organizations and churches and, you know, this kind of thing. The Virgil Clarksons of the world, a very rich history of contribution to this community in a variety of kinds of ways. There's a very interesting story in there on John Grace, the piano man, the blind piano technician, who was very early on in the 50s. And he talks about, you know, he was in and out of people's homes tuning pianos all the time. But he didn't feel comfortable going to the churches. He commuted to Portland, Oregon on a Greyhound bus for years just to have a black church experience.
Wow.
That kind of thing that just sets you back on your heels and say, oh my God. And so as more and more people came, we used to gather, you know, all together, summertime. And in the book we talk about, you know, for 40 years we hosted a summer community
I read
gathering.
that,
Yeah.
It grew and
But
grew
it
and
just
grew.
grew and grew and grew and grew until it was just, you know, not possible anymore. But people, in spite of the exclusions, found ways to insert themselves into the fiber of the community in various aspects. And so the knowledge point there, I say to myself sometimes, the area has missed out on so much. And there've been some terrific people who's come and gone that they really didn't get to know, you know. And so you develop the knowledge base about their, regardless of your interest, there are ways you can serve, ways you can work to help change matters and situations and that kind of thing.
Well, that's a really powerful message for us today, is that to be engaged. You know, it's one thing to be able to look at society, to have your own critique of it, whether, you know, with whatever topic you wanted to focus upon. But it's another thing to decide that I'm going to be involved and I'm going to decide to be a part of the change, even though that's going to take some effort and some sacrifice.
Takes some doing.
Yeah.
Either you just assimilate into the culture you've become a part of, or you change the culture, or you isolate yourself and don't be a part of anything. Go to work, go home, drive into your driveway, come back out Monday, you know, as though there's nothing going on around you that you need to be a part of or trying to change. Different strokes for different folks.
When you look today at the landscape of Thurston County and you assess how we're doing, how we're functioning as a community, how we're functioning civically, where and with your reference point for the things that were experienced in this time period, what are some of the key points of engagement that you think are needed in this time in terms of justice and racial justice?
Well, there's a broad range of consciousness and awareness that I've observed in this Thurston County area, I'd say in the last 10 years, really. The last 5 years, since so much exposure by way of videos and cell phones recording certain incidents and the police brutality that black people have complained about for decades. And I know people have said to me, Thelma, you and your people need to knock that chip off your shoulder and get on with it. You know, that kind of insulting kind of thing. So all of a sudden, the world is viewing, you know, the murder of George Floyd, and then you learn about all the other unreported, unpublicized death by police kind of thing.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, diversity, equity, and inclusion just pops up everywhere, every workplace. Everyone's talking about DEI. And then the consciousness that says, you know, we're a lily white group. We got to do something about this. You know, so it's been very interesting to see some of the efforts that's been underway. Now all of a sudden people want to include you. You've been there all the time. They've been out there all the time. Then all of a sudden, you've been invited to this and invited to that.
Yeah.
And what about this? And you mind if I ask you about that? And so conversations have been going on that's never been taking place by people I've known a long time. And so it's a consciousness, it's in the air. Realtor groups owning up to, yes, we have been racist in our, you know, interaction with black people coming into the community. Banks saying, yes, we have to admit we were in the midst of redlining and practicing, but we've made this change and we've made that, you know. So conversations that were never happening are beginning to happen. And the book has conjured up a lot of courageous conversations by way of the question and answer periods that would come at the conclusion of my book talks. And that's opened up some avenues of conversation that weren't there before. But other kinds of things, not just this book, but other kinds of things, people maybe living next door to a person of color, you know, for many, many years and never really knew the person. Now all of a sudden, over the fence talk taking place. It's just been very interesting to see the human dynamics and the shifting that's going on. And that's why I said about the last 10 years, it's really been, and politically, you know, you think in terms of some of the battles we're not now fighting, and you say, oh my God, we thought we had long since put that to bed. Here we are struggling again for voting rights. Here we are, civil rights being taken away, and on and on and on. How can we be back to book burning and book banning and all this political stuff that's going on? So it weighs on you very heavily. Like I can't move on to the next, to the futuristic challenges because I got to back up and readdress and revisit things that, you know, 50 years ago we thought had been settled.
Right, and that's why it's so powerful to look at this time period and to see these issues of discrimination, to know that they still exist. They're still
In
influencing.
pockets, they certainly are. Yes, they
Even
certainly
though
are.
we can also look at it and say these are some ways that we're trying to address. These are some ways we're trying to change both consciousness and policy. Yeah.
And as I would make these book talks at different groups, Rotaries, Kiwanis, you know, Lions Clubs and this kind of thing, and someone might ask, well, Thelma, what can we do to make sure the kind of things you're talking about don't happen again? I'd say, well, when the last time you reviewed some of your policies, some of your practices, you know, your behaviors, how much of some of this is still going on? You know, so you start where you are and what you have within your realm to address. You know, if you're a realtor or whatever, are you open to showing people anywhere in the county they want to live, rural county, whatever, if they can afford it?
Things that they can actually have influence
Yes,
on. And
yes. Banks, what's on your books? You know, are you charging people of color a higher interest rate? Or I've said little things like that. Little things like that. I said, can you imagine how many millions and billions of dollars you've cheated black people and other people of color that could not own a home, could not have the seeds of family wealth development,
Yeah.
just think about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people say, oh, I never thought about that,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been very, very interesting, some of the group conversations as well as some one-on-one.
I love that you are just creating a forum for that in your book clubs and through the book being out. It's, by the way, this book is available locally at Browsers, so you can pick it up there
Browsers
and online.
Bookstore.
Yeah, yeah. And I wanted to also note in this book too, we talked about earlier. You named New Life Baptist and the founding of that church in 1975 as an important moment. I know that you personally were involved in the founding of this church, so it's important for you. We
Yes.
recognize that, but could you also talk about how this is important to the topic of your book, Blacks in Thurston County, Washington?
Well, I mentioned John Grace and the fact that for years he commuted to Portland just to find a black church experience. When we first came here, we did a lot of traveling up and down I-5 from Tacoma to Seattle, visiting black churches, trying to find a black church experience ourselves. Well, in the 70s, finally, some of us said, it's enough of us around here to start our own black church. And there was a minister who came through town that he came for some state government kind of things. He wasn't coming to start a church. And my husband, in talking to him, realized he was a minister. And he said, would you have any interest in starting a church? We have enough folk here. And so in 1975, June of 1975, we had the first meeting at in the Friendship Hall of the YWCA, because I worked at the Y at that time. And that's why we had the first service. So
Wow.
that's 48 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And so where we are now out there on Pacific Avenue,
Yeah.
New Life Baptist Church is really the 8th location we've been,
Oh.
from place to place, and finally been there in that location for about 23, 24 years now. Just kept growing. We were on the hill there on Puget for a number of years and just outgrew that. So as more and more black people came to the area and found a church community, and so it was very important that as a community of people that we had a black church, because the black church had been the gathering place for so much in our history. The civil rights movement, it was the gathering place, it was the training place, it was the triage location when you got knocked upside the head as you marched and protested. This is where you learned your black history, not only in the schools, but in the church. And so without a black church, regardless of what denomination, but it was a gathering place from a point of view of an ethnicity, of a historical group. And so with the project of the book being from 1950 to 1975, then I said, New Life gets in under the wire because it got started in 1975, so we can include that here as we conclude the book.
Yeah.
But it doesn't go much into the history of New Life other than its
No, the
founding, because
founding,
like
but-
I said, that was 48 years ago.
But it feels like an important moment for you to include, because there's this development over these years, these decades in this
Yes.
area. There's this sparse community for New Life, even at its inception to be named. It's a kind of galvanizing of a sense
Yes.
of black community and the validity of the togetherness and the strength of that community building and asserting and naming for itself what it needs and wants.
And so by 1975, there were a pretty good smattering of blacks scattered all over the place. So there was no neighborhood. There was no black neighborhood, but there was a black community, a conscious black community. And the church, again, was the gathering place. Whether you lived in Olympia, Tumwater, Lacey, Yelm, and New Life has always attracted a lot of the military. Living in Lakewood and Spanaway and Bethel and that kind of thing. So it's it's undergone growth spurts and, had up and downs like any other church, but it's thriving now.
It is thriving
It's
now.
thriving with the new leadership, with the new commitment to return to some of those things that are historical in the life of the black church. We did voter registration training this past year. We did our own candidate forum with the active elections going on in Thurston County. The Black Museum,
Which will
Martin
happen
Luther
again in
King
February.
Community
Yeah.
Program.
Yeah.
So a number of things that just should be there. And if we don't convene it, it won't get convened.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
happening, and I'm delighted to see it.
Yeah, just encourage people to check out those upcoming events
Yes.
in January and February. Like
Yes.
you mentioned, Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King.
Yes. Be a lot more information coming out
more
as soon
information,
as the
and then
holidays
in
are over.
February, Black History Month, and just
Yes.
the walk through.
Yes.
Yeah, amazing resources for our community. And you
Absolutely.
can know as you experience those that you are a part of that, and you've been a part of the legacy of that too.
And
Yeah.
this year, we're planning on opening it for longer hours,
Oh, okay.
for more of the public.
Great.
We're planning on daytime kinds of visits for schools to make field trips
Oh,
and
good.
bring the students. And so we, at the tail end of that last year, we had enough requests. Why don't you all open it to the public, if just for a short period of time?
Uh-huh.
So on a Saturday afternoon for 2 hours, it was open to the public, and 167 people filed through there in 2 hours. But obviously, they needed more time
Yeah.
because they were stopping, they were reading, they were,
Yes,
you
lots.
know, and just had to keep moving to cover the whole pop-up museum in
Uh-huh.
2 hours. So we're trying to take all of that into consideration in our assessment and evaluation of what did we do well, what do we need to expand. So all those plans are in place and have been worked on for the last couple of months already.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for that. And I want to just encourage people to stay tuned and look for that. And
Yes.
we're going to begin to close, but I want to offer you the prompt for the final question, and I'll give you a little time to think about it while I just do a plug for the book again. I always like to close with asking people how they define hope and where they're seeing hope. So I'll give you just a minute to chew on that, but I want to just again thank our guest, Dr. Thelma Jackson, for being here today. This is the book, Blacks in Thurston County, Washington, 1950 to 1975, a community album. You can get it just down the road here at Browser's Books. And it's a beautiful read, offering biographies of pioneers and people who came here, Black families, and how they integrated into the community, how they changed the communities around them for the better, and what they contributed to the experience that we know of now today in Thurston County. So thank you for writing the book. Thank you for being here. And we'll conclude just by turning back to you and going to this final question of how do you define hope and where are you seeing hope today?
No one's really have ever asked me that question. How do I define hope? And I'd not like to think it in terms of just dreaming, but hope being the possibilities of what can be. Coupled with a dream, of course. Hope being based upon what you know about the past and how you want to project into the future and what role you want to play in it. Hope being that thing that kind of calls you into that space. Things can be better, things can be different, things are changing. Are they changing in the direction you'd have them go? Because change is constant. That's the one thing that always happens. But change for the sake of change isn't a good thing. And we're experiencing some horrendous change in our lives right now. But it's not good change, and it's not change in the direction you want to go. So you hope that the time you spend, the engagement you choose to have about your life, that it makes a difference in those changes. And you, if you're a religious kind of person, you pray, you ask for guidance, what is my role to be? What gifts and talents have I been blessed with that I'm now expected to give back? And it's not just enough to hope, but what must one do to help realize was on the side of that hope. So I think that those are the kinds of things that spur me on when thinking in terms of hope. It's not just enough to hope. One has to be willing to participate, be engaged, contribute, and make use of the gifts and talents you've been blessed with.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will just offer back to you, I see that manifested in your life. So thank you so much for your many decades of service, your courage, wisdom, skills that you've offered back into the community. We are all grateful for your contributions.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you. So again, today my guest is Dr. Thelma Jackson. This has been Lean in Olympia. Just want to encourage you again to check out the Interfaith Works website and our YouTube and Spotify channel for past episodes. We're very grateful for you for being here today. Thanks, Patrick, for running the show here in the background. Be well, everyone. We'll see you soon.